It often begins not with a scream, but a whisper. A quiet unease that sits in the pit of your stomach, too subtle to name but too persistent to ignore. You find yourself second-guessing your words, scanning their face for approval, tiptoeing through conversations like navigating a minefield. And the strangest part? You call this love. But Carl Jung would urge you to stop and ask, is it love, or is it a toxic mirror reflecting your shadow back at you? Jung believed that relationships are mirrors, powerful projections of what we carry inside. In his view, a toxic dynamic doesn't just stem from the other person's flaws. It emerges when our unconscious wounds latch onto theirs in a dance of dysfunction. In these subtle exchanges, we reveal not just our patterns, but our deepest fears. Let's begin peeling back the curtain. Here are the first signs you might be in a toxic relationship, not because you're weak or naive, but because you're human and your shadow is hungry. Sign 1. You feel small in their presence, even when they're not saying a word. There's a quiet shrinking that happens, not from insults or loud commands, but from silences that feel like judgment, glances that slice through your confidence. You find yourself minimizing your achievements, speaking less, apologizing more. Your inner light dims just to keep their ego comfortable. Jung would say this is a projection of your own disowned power. You hand over your agency not because they asked, but because some part of you believes you're safe or small. This belief may have been formed long ago, in childhood, in trauma, in a moment where being too much felt dangerous. The toxic partner doesn't need to yell. Your inner critic does the work for them. Sign 2. You're always too sensitive, until you numb out. It starts with a wince. A sharp word lands wrong. You voice discomfort, and suddenly, the spotlight flips. You're overreacting. Why do you always take things so personally? So you start editing your feelings, then eventually suppressing them altogether. Jung taught that when feelings are consistently invalidated, the psyche begins to disassociate. You disconnect from your instincts, your emotional radar. Over time, numbness replaces intuition. And when you're numb, you can't tell when a boundary is being crossed, only that you feel hollow afterward. The tragedy here is not that you feel too much, it's that you've been trained to feel less. Sign 3. The relationship feels like a performance. You can't leave, you catch yourself. Rehearsing conversations in your head before they happen, censoring your words to avoid conflict, crafting versions of yourself that feel more lovable. The spontaneity that once defined your connection fades, replaced by a careful script. Jung might say you're trapped in a persona, a mask adopted for survival. When you can't show your authentic self, the relationship becomes an emotional theater. You perform happiness, you pretend things are fine, but backstage, there's a version of you crying silently in the wings, wondering if they'll ever be allowed on stage. Toxicity thrives in roles. One partner becomes the fixer, the pleaser, the buffer. The other becomes the storm. Neither one is free. Sign 4. You keep trying to earn their love. No matter how much you give, time, energy, forgiveness, it never feels like enough. You work to be more patient, more understanding, more desirable. But love shouldn't feel like a report card you're always failing. Jung would point to the shadow here too. Often, we unconsciously recreate familiar pain from our past, hoping for a different outcome. You may be trying to heal an old wound by making this person love you in a way a parent never did. The relationship becomes a proving ground, but the test was never fair. And here's the cruel twist. The more effort you give, the more they withdraw. It's not because you're unworthy, it's because their love was conditional from the start. To be continued. Toxicity isn't always loud. Sometimes it whispers in the form of confusion, self-doubt, and longing. And what Carl Jung teaches us is this: if you want to break free, you must look not just at them, but at the parts of yourself that agree to the terms. In the next section, we'll dive into even deeper signs, the ones you dismiss, rationalize, or bury. But they're speaking. Are you ready to listen? The shadow beneath the smile. When love becomes a cage. You laugh at their jokes, even when they sting. You smile in photos that don't match the ache inside. From the outside, things may even look perfect. But inside, something's unraveling. And yet, you stay. Not because you don't see the signs, but because you've convinced yourself this is just how love works. Carl Jung warned that we're not just drawn to others by affection, we're drawn by the unconscious pull of our shadow. Often we find ourselves loving the very thing that wounds us, not because we're broken, but because a hidden part of us is seeking wholeness. Let's keep exploring the subtle traps of toxic relationships, ones that manipulate through charm, confuse through affection, and shatter self-trust. Sign 5. They apologize. Just enough to keep you close. They hurt you, then say all the right words. I'm sorry. You know I didn't mean it. I was just stressed. I didn't think. You hear remorse, and it gives you hope. Maybe this time it will be different, but then it happens again. Jung would say that repeated patterns, when left unexamined, aren't just coincidences. They are evidence of archetypes at play. In this case, the wounded child and the elusive lover. You keep reaching for their promise, and they keep withdrawing, just enough to remain out of reach. It's not healing, it's a cycle. This dance isn't about growth, it's about control disguised as redemption. Sign 6. Your boundaries are negotiable. When they don't like them, at first you say no, but then comes the guilt trip, the sulking, or worse, the sudden withdrawal of affection. Before long, you're bending. You find yourself giving in, again, not because you've changed your mind, but because peace is easier than another argument. According to Jung, boundary violations aren't just relational, they're spiritual. Every time you ignore your internal no, you chip away at your soul. Your integrity becomes diluted in the name of keeping the peace. But peace that demands silence is not peace. It's emotional suffocation. You weren't meant to be a contortionist for someone else's comfort. Sign 7. You don't recognize yourself anymore. You used to be bold, curious, joyful, but now you feel like a muted version of who you once were. You dress differently, speak cautiously, dream smaller. This erosion of identity doesn't happen overnight. It happens drip by drip. A passive-aggressive comment here, a dismissive shrug there. And over time, you begin to internalize the message. Who you are isn't quite right. Jung's theory of individuation.
If this content is making sense to you, click the subscribe button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for your support.
Becoming your truest self stands in direct opposition to this. Toxic relationships don't just block that journey, they actively pull you away from it. They reward conformity, they punish authenticity, and in doing so, they rob you of your essence. The deeper trap. It doesn't always feel bad. Here's the most confusing part. It's not all awful. Sometimes they're kind. Sometimes they hold you when you cry, listen when you break down, even champion your dreams. Until they don't. The inconsistency becomes addictive. You start chasing the version of them that shows up once in a while, believing that's who they really are. But as Jung might warn, beware of those who are only kind when it benefits them. A toxic dynamic thrives in inconsistency. It keeps you tethered, confused, hopeful. And that hope is what traps you. You tell yourself, they're not all bad. But it's not about all bad. It's about whether the good is consistent, safe, and real. The emotional cost of staying by now. Maybe you're wondering why you've stayed so long. Maybe you're even blaming yourself. But remember, emotional manipulation doesn't announce itself. It seeps in slowly, rewiring your inner compass. Carl Jung would encourage you not to shame your vulnerability, but to understand it. You stayed because some part of you believed love was supposed to hurt. You stayed because the pain felt familiar. You stayed because you thought you could fix it. But staying doesn't heal the wound, it deepens it. And you can only walk away once you realize this isn't your job to fix. To be continued. Toxic love isn't always violent or loud. Sometimes it's patient. Sometimes it holds your hand while slowly rewriting your worth. Jung reminds us, we can't escape our shadow, but we can stop letting it choose our relationships. In the next section, we'll explore the root behind the pattern, what draws you to the toxicity in the first place, and how reclaiming your shadow is the key to breaking free for good. The psychology of attraction, why we're drawn to what hurts us. You've left once, maybe twice, but somehow you always come back. They say all the right things. Their voice softens, their eyes shimmer with regret, and suddenly the pain blurs into memory. You tell yourself, they're trying, and maybe they are, but something deeper is pulling you back. And it's not love, it's your unconscious. Carl Jung believed that what we fail to make conscious will return as fate. In other words, we don't just fall in love, we fall into our unresolved wounds. We are drawn, not randomly, but magnetically, to the people who mirror our hidden pain. And until we face that pain, we confuse comfort with connection. The familiarity trap. Maybe you grew up walking on eggshells, where love meant guessing moods and earning affection. Now, in adulthood, chaos feels like chemistry. You mistake anxiety for passion, tension for intensity. But it's not passion, it's repetition. Jung would say, this is the psyche's attempt at integration. The unconscious seeks to resolve what the conscious mind avoids. So, you're drawn to people who embody the parent who criticized you, the sibling who ignored you, or the partner who left. Not because you want pain, but because a part of you believes, if I can win them over, I'll finally be enough. But healing doesn't happen by reliving the wound. It happens by choosing different. Projection. Seeing who they could be, not who they are. You don't love them for who they are now. You love who they could become. This is one of the most dangerous illusions in a toxic relationship. You see their potential, not their pattern. You justify bad behavior with, they didn't mean it, or they're just struggling. You become their therapist, their savior, their excuse. Jung warned of this psychological trap. Projection is when we disown a part of ourselves and assign it to someone else. You see their potential because it's a reflection of your own. But as long as you focus on their healing, you avoid your own. You cannot save someone who doesn't want to be saved. And losing yourself in the attempt isn't noble. It's self-abandonment. Shadow bonds, trauma as the glue. It's not always abuse that holds toxic relationships together. Sometimes it's shared trauma. Maybe you both come from pain. Maybe you bond over darkness. There's comfort in that. You feel seen, understood. But pain isn't the same as compatibility. Shared wounds don't guarantee shared growth. Jung's concept of the shadow bond is about this exact connection. When two unhealed people find safety in each other's dysfunction, it feels like love, but it's more like an emotional pact. I won't challenge your darkness if you don't challenge mine. And while it may feel safe, it keeps you both stuck. The addiction to hope. They say something sweet. They promise to change. And for a moment, you believe. Hope can be beautiful, but in toxic dynamics, it becomes a drug. You chase the version of them that shows up only occasionally, enduring the worst just to get a taste of the best. This intermittent reinforcement is exactly what makes it so hard to leave. It creates a cycle of craving. You're not staying for love. You're staying for the chance that the love might return. But Jung might ask, what part of you is addicted to pain dressed as promise? Until you confront that answer, you'll keep mistaking breadcrumbs for a feast. The inner conflict, love versus loyalty to your wounds. Here's the brutal truth. Sometimes the part of you that stays is loyal to your trauma. You learned that love means endurance, that to be chosen, you must be patient, that if you suffer long enough, they'll see your worth. But that's not love, that's survival. Jung believed that healing begins when we stop romanticizing pain, when we stop calling struggle a virtue and start calling it what it is. A sign we've abandoned ourselves. You don't have to prove your worth through suffering. You already are enough. What keeps you? There isn't love. It's the fear of losing the dream. Sometimes we don't fear being alone. We fear letting go of the fantasy. You imagined growing old together. You pictured your future. You believed they were the one. Letting go doesn't just feel like heartbreak. It feels like death. The death of a dream. But Jung would say that dreams that demand you shrink are not worth keeping. You deserve a reality where your light doesn't have to dim to keep someone close. To be continued. In the final section, we'll walk through the path out. Not just leaving the relationship, but leaving behind the identity you built around it. Jung reminds us, the shadow isn't evil, it's wounded. But once acknowledged, it becomes your greatest teacher. Healing begins when you stop rescuing others and finally return to yourself. The exit isn't the end, it's the beginning. Leaving a toxic relationship isn't the final step, it's the first. At first, there's relief. Then, there's silence. A stillness so loud it drowns out your thoughts. You question everything. Was it really that bad? Did I overreact? What if they really do change this time? This is where many people return, not because they want more pain, but because pain is predictable. And when your nervous system has lived in chaos, peace can feel like danger. Carl Jung warned us, we are not only afraid of our darkness, we're also afraid of our light. To walk away from pain is to walk into unfamiliar freedom. And that freedom requires you to become someone new, someone no longer defined by their wounds. Who are you without the pain? This question haunts many survivors of toxic relationships. You spent so long trying to be enough for someone else, you lost sight of what you actually need. The relationship became your identity. Their approval was your compass. Now, without them, you feel unmoored. But this is not emptiness. It's space. Space to rebuild, to rediscover. Jung believed individuation, the process of becoming whole, requires confronting the unconscious and reclaiming the disowned parts of ourselves. This is your chance to do just that. To find the version of you that doesn't need saving or fixing, but simply needs witnessing. You are not broken. You are buried. And now you dig. The grief of what could have been. What makes toxic love so hard to release isn't just the pain, it's the potential. You're not mourning reality. You're mourning the idea of who they could have been, of what the two of you could have built. That imagined future becomes a ghost, haunting every step forward. But Jung would say, fantasy is a projection of the unconscious. It reflects your hopes, your wounds, your desires, not necessarily what is true. And while grief is natural, don't confuse hope with history. You're not leaving a person. You're leaving a story, one that kept you small, afraid, and unseen. Now, you get to write a new one, turning the focus inward. After the breakup, many people immediately ask, why did I attract that? It's a fair question, but one often laced with shame, as if toxicity was your fault, as if you should have known better. But Jung reminds us, the unconscious doesn't operate with judgment, it operates with patterns. You didn't choose pain on purpose. You chose what felt familiar, what felt right in your body, even if it was wrong for your soul. Now, the work is not self-blame, but self-inquiry. What part of you equated love with struggle? Where did you learn that loyalty means self-erasure? And most importantly, are you ready to unlearn it? Healing isn't about perfection, it's about awareness. And awareness creates choice. The rebirth, becoming who you were meant to be. This is the hardest part, not walking away, but staying away long enough to meet the person you were before the damage. That person is still there, hidden beneath layers of survival strategies, people-pleasing, and emotional armor. They've been waiting. Not for the relationship to change, but for you to change. Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And that privilege requires letting go of who you had to be just to survive. You are not the version of you shaped by someone else's chaos. You are not the mask you wore to keep the peace. You are not the silence you held to avoid conflict. You are what remains when you stop running. Building a life that feels safe. Now, the goal is not just to survive, but to feel safe, loved, and whole. That might mean learning to set boundaries that once felt mean, saying no without explanation, choosing peace over passion, rewiring your nervous system so calm doesn't feel like boredom. It may be messy, you'll likely stumble, but the difference now is this. You are no longer abandoning yourself. Every choice that honors your truth becomes an act of self-respect. Every time you resist the urge to go back, you rewrite the script. You are no longer the wounded, you are the healer, and not of others, of yourself. A final reflection, Jung's greatest gift. Jung never promised a life free of pain. He promised meaning. He believed that facing our darkness is how we reclaim our power. That integration, not perfection, is the path to wholeness. You left the relationship, but more importantly, you left the illusion that pain is love. Now you don't just walk away, you walk towards something, yourself.